Okay, I think we're gonna make a start. We were due to start at 1:15. I think we're in the main thoroughfare from lunch to the other rooms, so we may have some people coming through the back. Before I start, I'm just conscious this is the first time we've used this room for this session. So if anybody is got one of the cheap seats behind one of these pillars, please feel free to move around and get in a position where you can see the slides at least. So the mic's here, so we're going to have to stand here as well. So I think the slides are the most important. So just before, if I just get started, we're doing a session, as it says on the slides, about small firms and developing your business. This is really a practical session around how we're developing our regulatory model and how that impacts on smaller firms. Some real practical information around our authorisation processes and how we're changing those and how we can support you through various processes within authorisation. And also within our supervision area, some practical advice about the types of issues we deal with within supervision, how we can support you in terms of those type of issues, and really encouraging you to come and talk to us as early as possible. So before I start though, if I just do a few introductions. My name's Robert Loughlin. I'm the Executive Director of Operations and Quality at the SRA. Responsible for basically the bulk of the operation at the SRA, so things like authorisation, supervision, things like the contact centre, our client protection teams, around about 400 staff across the SRA and about 6 directorates. I'm joined today, and the bulk of the presentation is going to be delivered by Rachel and Dean. Rachel is our Director of Authorisation and the Contact Centre, and Rachel will be talking about some of those practical issues around authorisation, how we can help small firms. And Dean is one of our regulatory supervisors and is working on the ground on a daily basis with firms to do with kind of enforcement and supervisory issues. And I'll let Dean introduce himself when he gets up later on. We want to kind of walk through some of the practical issues that we're facing. Before we do, I'll just run through a couple of slides just to set a bit of context. So you saw a lot of this morning around the size of the legal sector, the fact that it's growing, the fact that 62% of those employed are in solicitors are in solicitor firms. I think importantly, the figure that wasn't mentioned this morning is the importance of small firms. 26,000 solicitors, which is about a fifth of the solicitor population, and actually 48% of firms. Really important part of our regulatory community. And I think over the last couple of years we've tried to emphasise that we are here to support small firms, we want to work with small firms. We don't have a negative perception of small firms as I think we had a couple of years ago. I think we're really here and the doors are open. Hopefully that will come across in the various presentations that we give, that Rachel and Dean talk you through. I think, again, you've seen this slide earlier on today. This is the unmet needs slide. And I think the one on the bottom about 1 in 10 small businesses not accessing solicitors. I think what we wanted to say with this slide is there are opportunities. There are opportunities that are developing because this market's changing so quickly. And I think what we want to get over in terms of this session is how we want to work with you as small firms to develop your business. And we're probably not going to tell you how to become more profitable, but what we are going to talk about is how we can break down those barriers that we create as a regulator to stop you from growing your business, and also some of the regulatory issues that you will come across or do come across in terms of the day-to-day, and some practical advice on how to deal with those. I think we've listened over the last couple of years to what small firms have been saying to us. So we've heard that we're inflexible and rigid in our approach, that sometimes we take a tick box attitude. We take a one-size-fits-all attitude, which doesn't work. And we've heard that small firms are less well-resourced. The regulatory burden is heavy, and as small firms, you're less well-resourced. And we know there's a general reluctance for small firms and individuals to come and talk to us. The fear of coming into the regulatory sort of light. And we want to kind of dispel some of those fears and talk about the fact that we want you to come to us, we want you to talk to us about your authorisation plans, about the regulatory issues that you're dealing with, and actually trying to deal with those earlier in the process to try and support you. I think some of the stuff that we would say that we're doing, you know, we want to be, and we are, and it's important, and this is what you've told us, we are a strong, we need to be a strong and effective regulator, striking the right balance between, as Paul mentioned earlier on, the public interest and regulation. So there is red tape, we're the regulator, but we need to break that down and reduce as much as possible. We understand the small firm pressures, the pressures you're under in terms of small firms, and hopefully you'll glean more of that as Rachel and particularly Dean goes through the experiences that they've had later on. We need to take a proportionate approach. And I think it's important that we take a proportionate approach with small firms as well as those larger firms. And I think certainly the criticisms we've heard in the past is that we take a different approach to small firms to large firms. Well, that's not the approach that we're taking, but it's important that both in terms of large firms and small firms, we take a proportionate approach, that we engage, that we talk about regulatory issues, and we don't just simply take a tick box approach. We need to remove prescription and red tape, and actually some of that is being driven at the moment through our innovation initiative. Trying to say to you, look, if you've got ideas of growing your business, ideas of changing your model, come and talk to us. Come and talk to us about those ideas. And if our regulatory framework gets in the way, we want to talk to you about that and talk about how we can change that potentially, either through waivers or through other methods. And ultimately, we want to make it easier for you to work with us, to deal with us. You know, in terms of the operation, we've seen some real improvements in terms of certainly the KPIs, the key performance indicators that I work to in terms of reporting to the board. We've seen in all parts of our operation, things like our timeliness improve. But it's important that the way in which we deal with you improves as well. We've done a lot of work in terms of the tone, the way in which our staff are dealing with individuals, that we aren't putting up brick walls and making it difficult for you to deal with us, and we need to do more of that. Particularly as we introduce new IT, and the opportunities of new IT will create more opportunities for us to take that forward. So we've got a few areas we're going to cover here, a lot of which is in place at the moment in terms of support. Rachel's going to talk about some of the regulatory reform that is impacting on small firms. Dean's going to talk a little bit about some of the tools and services that we've got in place to support small firms, including things like our small firms virtual reference group. And at the end, I'll make a pitch to you to come and join our small firm reference group, virtual reference group, to get involved in the debate, to get involved in the discussion, which we want to continue moving forward. Rachel will also talk about some of our operational improvement, and of course, we'll talk about the innovation agenda as well. So just back to the start, to manage expectation, practical session. This is about small firms. This is about how we as a regulator are changing the way we work to come support small firms, and some practical tips and advice along the way. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel, and then we'll then go on to Dean.
So as Robert mentioned, my name is Rachel Lewis, and I'm the Director of Authorisation and the Contact Centre. So what I thought I would give you an update on in a little bit more detail is some elements of our regulatory reform programme that may benefit you as a small firm. Now, there has been sessions today that have given you more insight. For example, you would listen to Julie Brannan give more of an overview about our second consultation for the solicitor's qualifying exam. But really, what I wanted to draw to your attention from the Training for Tomorrow work programme is that actually strengthening the entry to qualification and making that more robust will actually help you with growing your business. It will open the market, and it will provide more flexibility for people to qualify as a solicitor. But what I would like to highlight is that within authorisation there are already alternative routes that individuals could qualify as a solicitor that you may want to take an opportunity to explore that could again broaden the growth of your business. So for example, we do have an application form where we'll consider equivalent means. So it might be that you have paralegals within your firm that we may be able to assess that we deem does have an equivalent experience of a training contract. We have already admitted paralegals. So if you are interested in that, or if potentially you have foreign qualified lawyers that could do the qualified law transfer scheme, we do have individuals on our markets stands today that will be able to talk you through that process and help you with that. Wanted to really highlight the looking to the future work stream where we're obviously revising all of our handbook. That's really imperative to our authorisation process, because every single application and authorisation decision that we do will potentially change when this new handbook is implemented. For context, within authorisation, we make over 250,000 regulatory decisions a year that will range from firms wanting to be authorised to take trainees right the way through to authorising firms or renewing practicing certificates. So what we really are wanting to work with you for is that there might be ideas that you think are, sort of barriers or things that are preventing you from being authorised. And it's important that we engage with you, because actually putting that feedback into that means that we can incorporate those within the handbook reform. And the final thing that I sort of wanted to mention is that we are also doing a review of our fee structure. It's important and imperative that we do that, because our goal is to ensure that we become and continue to be operationally efficient. And the more efficient that we become means that we try to drive down the cost of our actual applications, so we can obviously then transfer those cheaper costs to you, which again will help your business model. So what I wanted to do is to really give you an update of what elements we've been doing within my units to improve the operation and the service that we provide to you. Our ultimate goal is to try and ensure that we're easy to do business with. And if I'm honest, we weren't historically very good at that. And we're trying to change the mindset, but there's a lot more that we need to do. So absolutely, our brief is, we need to be quicker. We are getting quicker, but there's a lot more that we can do for that. In order to get quicker, it's really those three other categories that we have been working on to improve the timeliness. It's also about perception. Within firm-based authorisation, if you're talking 3 years ago, 4 years ago, if you were authorised, if you asked to put a request in to be a sole practitioner or maybe a partnership, some of those applications were taking more than 6 months, some 9 months, and that wasn't acceptable. The problem I have though is that often, once you're authorised, you don't really do those applications again. So you're then obviously not aware of how we're actually improving the service. So today I'll give you a little bit sort of flavour of that. And although we're striving to improve the timeliness, it's imperative that we don't compromise on the quality. So every single decision that we make within my departments has a level of quality assurance depending on the risk for it. And we also have introduced a centralised independent QA function that also adds that extra layer. But what we've realised is that actually we need to provide more information about our decision-making process and to be transparent. And we've published information now on our website that actually gives the information of what's the criteria, what's the information, what are the type of risks that we're looking at, which will actually inform whether we literally approve or refuse an application. But the mindset is to very rarely refuse. The mindset now is to work with you to say, we may not be able to do this model, but have you thought about this approach or change, or why actually are you wanting to be a recognised body? Is it actually that it could be an alternative business structure, etc. And customer service is really integral to this. Robert mentioned that we're really trying to change the tone. I'd like to add to that to say what we're trying to include and incorporate is a mindset that was actually human beings trying to help you with whatever service that you want from the SRA. I think before it's been as if there's this scary barrier, or the computer says no, or lots of red tape, or even feedback of, do you know, I didn't actually even get in touch with you because I just looked at those application forms and they were so off-putting and so many pages that I thought, you know what, I can't be bothered, I'm just going to stay as is. So they're the type of things that we're sort of having to address. With the tone, we're looking at the choice of language that we use. So every application form is being revised to make sure that we're asking the questions in the most simplest format, that actually our guidance notes make sense and are practical, and so that you understand those. And I will caveat that we've still got a long way to go. The definition for me of turnover just still needs work, you know, client money, all of those, trying to make them as practical and simple as possible. But feedback that we've had from our centralised QA team is that actually when we are dealing with the cases, although we're now getting a lot quicker, we're not progressing those applications as efficiently as we could. And it's often because of the way that we interact with you that is causing those delays. So what we're trying to get smarter at is making sure that we complete an initial investigation and that we assess what's all the information that we actually need. And rather than playing this sort of table tennis ping pong approach via email, picking up the phone and actually having a conversation with you to talk through it so we can check our understanding of actually what you want, you know, what you're looking for, and making sure that we've got the right information. And then when we do contact you via writing, we do that in the most simplest way possible. We're doing lots of work with our website in this sort of similar vein, making sure that the information is accessible, and more importantly, you're not having to actually work to try and find that information. And then the final part of this component in improving our operation is about process. We're having to look at every single element of our applications, really just to make sure, are they working as effectively as they can be? And to be honest, the answer is no, but we are doing a lot more to improve that. We're looking at application forms. If you did apply to be authorised a couple of years ago, I'm sure absolutely remember the experience and perhaps trauma of how lengthy that application was, with I think at least 94 questions. What we've done now is we've revised those applications, we've tailored them, and if you were a small firm that is already existing and perhaps considering converting maybe to an LLP or, you know, from a partnership, converting that way, we've now got a new tailored application form for you because we know most of the information about you. So we're not trying to duplicate the same questions, which I absolutely know will infuriate you. So my first point with this slide is, I'm sure you're wondering, you've come to this conference and why am I showing you a photo of post-it notes? This actually is a process map of the renewal of practicing certificate exercise. And what we've done is we've gone back to basics and we're considering the journey of the customer and every single element of that journey, and every element in sort of when it comes in the back office as well. The pink post-it notes means pain. And so in one way, you could say actually the practicing certificate renewal process has improved. Some of you will, if you've been a sort of COLP or a COFA for long enough, will have remembered the launch of the online process. I hear the noise of that. I actually joined the team the year after and was given the brief of make this work. And I hope that you have seen improvements. You know, when I first had that brief, it was touch and go whether actually we could launch the renewal in the time period that's required. And you definitely, you know, took a long time still to get your practicing certificate. The goal of this year is that for 98% of you, you'll receive your practicing certificate hopefully within 48 hours. But really what I want to show you is that's the process now, and every single one of those is we still want to have a culture of continual improvement. What we've realised is that if we're going to improve our operations, we have to change the mindset and look about the voice of the customer and what the experience is for them. And I want that really sort of translates to you in that, we're recommending that you do the same. Feedback from consumers is they're not actually complaining or most of the time questioning the quality of your services, but they are frustrated about that customer journey experience. They're frustrated that they don't know when their next letter is going to come. They're frustrated that actually, from some of you, that they're still receiving it by letter, not by email, and that they're not understanding what that sort of journey process is. So doing these elements of breaking down every step of the process will hopefully mean that we're easier to do business with. Now we are seeing improvements within our operations already. I mentioned the practice and certificate, where obviously we're hoping to make most of those decisions of standard applications within 48 hours. But we're also making significant improvements within our firm-based authorisation. In 2014, the average time to make an authorisation decision was 74 days, and in September it was just over 30. But most people still think that it will take nearly a year or 9 months. So really we're wanting to get that message out and engage with you, come and talk to us. And again, depending on your model, we'll obviously work with you to try and make that process as speedy as possible. But we're also having to acknowledge that actually we are very aware that you need to know what that date of approval potentially would be, because you're running a business. That costs money in those delays. You might have note paper, marketing, PR, etc. So the mindset's also changed, where we're trying to say, well, actually, what date's ideal for you, and let's see what we can do to make that happen. You've seen lots of information today about the sort of SRA Innovate initiative, and I just really wanted to highlight a couple of points from a small firm's perspective. It's absolutely right and integral that we have a responsibility that we've got to try and remove as much red tape and bureaucracy in order that you can grow your business, because the market is changing. Technology is definitely the #1 change and growth within the firm's business. There are more people now offering online services. There are law firms out there now that are offering artificial intelligence. But the key thing I wanted to highlight is that in the press, in the legal press, it's not often very sexy to talk about small firms and the type of innovative ideas they're doing. You often just hear, the larger firms or ABSs or the accountancies, etc. So really, innovation for me is that it doesn't have to be a massively radical idea. Any idea for me is about growing your business and innovation. So reiterating, come to us and we'll obviously go through that idea. Most often, we'll engage and we'll start a conversation with an applicant, and they'll start with, I don't think you're going to improve this. Your regulations, I'm sure, don't allow it. They often think that about virtual practices. And we say, no, actually, we do approve virtual practices. We will work with you, though, to look at what the risks are for those. People want to work more flexibly. People want to be able to actually potentially outsource to consultants, and then they be able to choose the hours that they work to meet the demands. So the conversations that we have with those applicants is, yes, absolutely, we can consider that, but what we want you to consider is, how will you ensure the supervision of those consultants that you choose to use? How will you ensure the quality and the consistency of that work if you're using that virtual practice model? And very importantly, and Dean will cover this in a little detail, is what will you do to ensure IT security? They'll talk about Fridays, but I'm sure that will mean a lot to you. Cybercrime and Friday afternoons are pretty scary times actually for what we see from the SRA. So just a few sort of numbers for you. I mentioned the legal press, and that often you only see in the media a new accountancy practice becoming an alternative business structure. This year to date, we have approved 106 alternative business structures, but 48 of those have actually been from small firms. And I don't think that people actually realise that. So if you've got an idea, come to us. We've got people on the market stands, and we can obviously help support you with that. So that's really what we're trying to change. We're trying to actually engage up front and have these pre-application meetings in a medium that works for you. You know, if you prefer to do that by telephone, then absolutely. If you'd like us to come to your offices, we're equally happy. If you want to come to the SRA offices, that's even, you know, sort of even better. There's more that we can do with a conversation to understand what your goal is, the more we can help. There will be lots of scenarios where our current regime doesn't actually permit what you want to do, but that doesn't mean that it should be a no. It may mean that actually our existing framework needs to actually change. So there are several applications that we've approved where actually we've made a waiver because we recognise that that's something that we don't want to put into the handbook change. So we'll work with you with what your idea is, as long as we can mitigate the risk. And that's really the final point on there about the risk outlook. If you read the risk outlook, you'd be daunted and quite put off and think, oh, I'll just stay with the status quo. We will still approve applications even if they present some of the risks highlighted there, but we're just asking you again to say, what controls will you put in to actually mitigate those risks? So a quick sort of PR again is that these slides will be published on our website, and I've specifically put Authorisation's email details here so that you can contact us with any type of application, whether it's pending or whether you're thinking of something, whether you've just got a really early idea of what you want to do. We're really, really keen to have that conversation with you, and we have got dedicated support available today. We are also, with the regulatory reform though, asking some really big questions that actually engaging with you will help inform and influence the change. I talked about the practicing certificate renewal, and you saw all of those pain processes, and in a way we're trying to, and we've nearly made it as slick as we can. But the handbook reform might actually fundamentally change that. I need to actually know is, do you actually still want to do a bulk renewal, or would you prefer that within your firm everybody does their own? I truly don't know what the response there is, because I get a mixed response wherever I go to a different conference or forum. We may explore actually having a lifetime licence. When you're authorised as a firm, you have a lifetime licence. So it could be the concept for a practicing certificate that you have a lifetime licence as well. So they're the type of questions that we're trying to explore, and even in an application process, it helps inform our thinking with that. The same with the virtual reference group. Whenever we're trying to make a change, we now use that virtual reference group to help us with the, have we got this right? Is it phrased correctly? What's your ideas with that? So I'm going to hand you over to Dean now, who is going to give you a little bit more information about the type of support that we provide once you are authorised.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dean Spencer, and I'm a regulatory supervisor at the SRA. Next year will be 40 years in the profession. Been at the SRA for 3 years, and for most of my professional life I worked in small firms. So I share your pleasure and I share some of your pain. I'm also a member of the small firms team, a dedicated team for your whatever you need from us. In terms of the support that's available, of course most of you will be aware of the ethics helpline. These are people that know the handbook, can recite it verbatim, very, very knowledgeable people. When we talk about the small firms team, actually it should really be called the smallish firm team, because we don't actually turn anybody away if you don't meet the exact criteria. So don't feel as though because you don't reach that criteria that you can't call us. Again, Robert did mention about the small firms virtual reference group, and it really is your opportunity to buy into what we're doing and to put your views forward and to help formulate future policy and practice. What I'd like to do is just to give you a scenario that I came across as a supervisor, which shows how the small firms team can really add value. And I have to say that when you're not in the SRA, when you're actually in the profession, how you can misconstrue the role of the SRA. Late on a Friday evening, we received a telephone call from a firm of solicitors that specialise in representing solicitors. And they said, we think we can't help this firm. We think it's going to be an intervention. Can you speak to them? We contacted the firm, 3-partner practice, Colt, Coffer and another salaried partner. They had had a major row. It resulted in the Coffer walking out, the salaried partner joining a firm down the road, leaving the Coffer in place. The Coffer, of course, was operating, instead of it being a partnership law practice, it certainly metamorphosised overnight into a sole practice, but of course without authorisation. We went down to see them, we got the partners together, we contacted our colleagues in authorisation in order to make sure that the firm was appropriately and properly authorised. They put it through for us straight away. This firm had £1.25 million in client account, some 20,000 files on site, some 30,000 files off-site. The storage charges were in arrear. There was a statutory demand against one of the partners from the revenue. It was not a good situation. The partners probably couldn't even agree that what day of the week it was, let alone trying to sort out this complete mess. We worked very closely with that firm, and over a period of some 15 months, we put a plan together, and we eventually ensured that all the client interests were protected, that all the files were protected, and that they were able to dissipate the files either to new firms or to the new firms where the departing partners were actually going. So a few years ago, that might have been a straight public interest intervention, but we worked with them and we brought about a good result for the consumer, a good result for the partners, and a good result from our point of view. Although it was quite a lot of input, much cheaper than the cost of intervention. I've picked out some key points here which come across my desk on a daily basis, and I think from a small firm's point of view it's a good idea to reiterate them. Again, document destruction policies. If you don't get this right, this is likely to come back and bite you at a later date in the event of a merger, a sale, or acquisition. I know what it's like. I was a litigator. You end up having lever arch files on top of your cabinet. You settle the matter, you cost it, you're paid, and then on that glorious day when you can say, can you get this down into the basement? And it's almost like a self-cleansing moment. However, just be careful about what you're putting downstairs, because it's going to come back and bite you, as I say, if you don't have a proper document destruction policy. Have a proper document destruction policy and make sure that it's being appropriately implemented. Disorderly wind down, I see some instances of that. don't underestimate the task of a wind down. This is not an overnight event. It takes a tremendous amount of planning. I see quite a lot of accounts rules breaches, and I suppose the hot topic at the moment, I've just picked up a case last week on this. Rule 14.5 of the SRA accounts rules, which is using client account as a banking facility. You'll be aware that there's been some recent cases at the SDT regarding this that reached national publicity. Sometimes, particularly small firms, have a very close relationship with their clients, and the clients will say, Mr. Roggs, I need to pay this, I need to pay that from these proceeds, etc. Well, of course, the rules are pretty clear about this, and that is that you cannot use client account as a banking facility. There has to be an underlying legal transaction. Residual balances. Tomorrow never comes. It's always a job that people want to do, but unfortunately they always put it off. It's a bit like doing a list of documents, really. You would always prefer to do something else. Residual balances is something else which will come back and bite you. I'm dealing with some firms whose residual balances are substantial and go back some considerable time. So be aware of that. Be also very careful. There's a firm I'm dealing with that has acquired 3 or 4 other practices, and due diligence didn't really exist, and therefore what they've done, they've acquired a significant amount of residual balances from the practices that they've acquired. So again, residual balances, be very conscious of that. Undertakings, the number of files that we receive on breach of undertakings, we can't enforce undertakings. All we can do is take appropriate regulatory action in the event that there is a breach of an undertaking. Most of the issues that arise in relation to undertakings are because they haven't been drafted appropriately. Misleading clients and third parties. Mistakes happen. Mistakes happen. And I'm just dealing with a case at the moment of a very young, newly qualified solicitor that has made a mistake. It would ordinarily be an application for relief from sanctions. Unfortunately, she decided to manufacture emails and dates on documents. If she came forward and said, I've made a mistake, I'm terribly sorry, can we get it to the insurers, can we apply for relief, it would be a very different situation to the situation that she's now facing. IT security, hacking cases, small firms are being targeted, so beware. I won't go into the sophistication of what the hackers are doing. If we get some time later on, or see me afterwards, I'll give you some inside information about how we think it's happening, but beware. Not reporting material breaches to the SRA. I get some material breach reports, I look at them and I see that a substantial amount of money has been transferred erroneously due to a cashier error. It's reported as material breach. But look, it's about proportionality, it's about being realistic, it was human error. So the mischief is not reporting it. That's the problem. What if scenarios? So what if there's death? What if there's illness, divorce, dispute within a small partnership? Just think about succession planning and what if. I think this is a really interesting statistical information. You'll see here that in the last 12 months there's been some 4,880 conduct matters reported to the Supervision Directorate, but interestingly, of those, 154 ended up at the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal, 230 internal actions, so that may be the adjudicator. But I spend much of my day closing cases, looking at the assessing the risk, looking at proportionality, looking at the public interest, and understanding why things have happened, and ensuring, insofar as we ever can, that the mistakes that have occurred don't reoccur. So I'll hand you now over to Robert.
If you stay up here, Dean, and Rachel joins us, I think that's really the update that we wanted to give you. This, as I said, a practical session about the work that we're doing both in authorisation and supervision. I think the key message is that certainly in terms of both areas, we want you to come and talk to us much earlier, or as early as you can. And I think the example that Dean gave was a really good example. Had the partners come and talk to Dean at an earlier stage, and obviously we got somebody informing us of that. Dean, as a supervisor, was able to deal with that much earlier. And Rachel, likewise, we are very interested in looking at our current regulatory model, looking at things like waivers, but also looking at how that informs our future regulatory changes we've got. I think the last thing I'd say before we come on to questions is, look, we've got this virtual group that we set up for small firms. We really encourage people to join. I think we've got about 60 individuals on it at the moment. We've done things like, for example, shared consultations on issues, talked about changes to application forms that we've made, and got feedback on that. So, my view is it's better to be part of the debate and the discussion, help us to kind of reform and change what we're doing and get involved, and we'd really encourage you to do that. And we're getting a huge amount of value out of that group, and we'll do indeed, as we move forward, for example, start to test and trial new IT to make sure it's working effectively. So today's session was not about how to make your business more profitable. We're not experts on that. What we are doing is trying to break down the barriers, break down the regulation that's in the way of you growing your business, and some practical tips are the things that you need to be wary of. So can I stop there and ask, has anybody got any questions? We've got about 15 minutes before we're due to vacate to the next session, I think. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask myself, Rachel, or Dean at this stage? Yep, over here.
You've mentioned IT a few times, and I wonder if you've ever considered. Sorry. I'll start again. You've mentioned IT a few times, and I wonder whether you've considered further approvals for various systems for small firms.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a we're the regulator. We're not business experts. I think there is a role for your representative body to give you advice on things like that. It's not a role for the SRA to approve certain systems. So we don't have that expertise, and we wouldn't do that. But I do think if you do have any queries about systems you're thinking of using, then talk to colleagues at the Law Society, or come and talk to us, and we can put you in touch with individuals that might be able to help. But it isn't something that we would be able to help in terms of the running of your business. We set the framework, and we regulate against the framework. It wouldn't be for us to advise on that.
Thank you. I thought you were simply hinting at it as you mentioned it.
Yeah.
But I recall in the past that the Law Society itself had various lists, but they were always a little bit watered down. So, and we're talking about IT a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back again. We're not the business experts. But if anybody has any thoughts on our IT, we'd very much encourage you to help us with that. And we've got a hugely rigorous process going on in terms of identifying our requirements, looking at the kind of the market, not only now, but in the future as well. And I've got to say, our IT programme, we're not thinking about the IT that's available now. We're thinking about what's going to be available in 5 years' time, 6, 7 years' time, and how is our business going to change in that time. I'm sure if you're making those decisions, those sort of things, I'm sure, are on your mind as well. Any other questions? Yep, kind of middle row, middle of the room. Yep, go ahead.
We heard this morning how there are large numbers of people out there who can't afford legal advice. I've certainly encountered it. I'm a sole practitioner, but there are small businesses who can't afford not the hourly rate, but the total cost of the job. And the topic of the title of today's session here is about how can we develop our business. So what would actually help me to reach out to some of those small businesses is a clear steer from the SRA that if I say to one of those potential clients, I can give you 80% of the benefit for 20% of the cost, but I'm not going to look into all the surrounding detail. I'm not going to research all the case law that I would for a full-blown client. I would like to know that you're not going to turn around and say, that's unprofessional conduct, that I haven't done the proper job that a solicitor would be expected to do. Can you give me that?
Do you want to give me? I think it's a good one for you.
This, you may consider this to be unsatisfactory, but from a regulatory perspective, when a file lands on a desk, I have to look at whether the solicitor or fee earner has complied with the principles. And I have to decide whether or not there's been a breach or a failure to achieve any of the mandatory outcomes. So in my view, if you are, it's strictly a matter of contract between solicitor and client as to what is agreed. But if it comes to a regulator, it will be assessed on the basis of the regulations that prevail.
So you are leaving me with all the fears that I currently have, which is why I don't reach down to those clients.
Well, the principles are in the process of being reviewed, but we can stand here. I mean, we talk about honesty, we talk about integrity, and it's important that as a regulator we show honesty and integrity as well. And frankly, if a file comes on my desk, I judge it on the basis of professional judgment as to whether or not the conducting solicitor has complied with the principles and achieved the mandatory outcomes, and it cannot be anything else.
Can I just say that part of our reform programme is and you would have heard this morning, is around looking at where solicitors can work, and part of that is looking at this unmet need, ensuring that solicitors, for example, can work in unregulated environments. Now, I think what we're trying to do there, and obviously there's a big debate around that, and it's a proposal, but the whole thrust of that is looking at trying to put solicitors on a level playing field with other businesses. And as Paul said earlier on today, the only people that can't work in unregulated businesses are solicitors. So part of the drive of our regulation, of our regulatory reform, is trying to create that level playing field, so that actually you are then in a position, if you decide to adopt a different structure, for example, to compete with other businesses that are able to offer services to those organisations. So I think there's probably more we need to do, and there is more we need to do in terms of the regulation, in terms of our reform programme. But a lot of it is about trying to ensure that, one, we're cutting the red tape to kind of free up as much as possible the opportunities for you to compete. But the wider regulatory reform proposal, particularly in our Look into the Future proposals, is around creating a level playing field. But at the same time, the professional principles, the ethics that we need you to follow, we need to maintain that, and that's important in terms of maintaining the trust of the public. So that stays the same, but actually the models you're operating in, we need to look at, we want to look at, to make sure that you can compete.
I don't want to talk ever so briefly, as long as the SRA understands that the reason the public have this unmet demand for legal advice is not the fault of me or my firm, it is the regulatory environment.
But I don't think we're saying it's your fault in the slightest. I think our premise of this presentation was there's an opportunity there for potential firms like yourselves to if there is 9 out of 10 individuals not accessing solicitors, and 9 out of 10 businesses, small businesses, not accessing solicitor firms. There's got to be an opportunity there. It will be filled, the vacuum will be filled by new and innovative models and other ways of providing those services. What we want to do is try and make sure that we're not creating barriers for you to take advantage of that. Don't have all the answers though, but I think our thrust of our proposals are around creating that opportunity where you can operate on a level playing field. Can I take a question? Let's start with this one, because I think you're next, and then we'll come to the gentleman over there, and then I think we need to probably wrap up.
Just quickly, Dean mentioned he's got latest news on attempts at hacking. Is it appropriate? Can you give us a
do you want to
quick minute?
Yes, it really is very much the hot topic at the moment, and of course it's tried law that from a regulatory perspective that if client money is in client account and there's a fraud perpetrated and the money is transferred to the hackers, then of course there is an obligation to pay that money back into client accounts. Technically, it does count as a shortfall. What we're seeing at the moment, and the sophistication of the hackers is of course well known, but what seems to be happening is that there seems to be some sort of software that's available, and they are picking up on keywords, so completion, exchange, and other conveyancing terminology. They're then downloading from the ether emails, and they're then changing their emails to purport to be from the firm. And the changes are very, very subtle. So it could be john_blogs.com, but the one they're using is john-blogs.com, and it looks very, very similar. But many firms now on their material actually have a warning notice saying we don't change our client's account. If you've got any doubt, then you telephone. I was talking to a firm the other day. They said, well, the way it's going, we're looking at actually doing completions by cheque now because it's just we're so nervous about it. One has really got to be on guard, and particularly small firms. As we've said before, and you've probably seen it publicised, that Fridays, of course, generally speaking, completion day, it's rife, and cashiers have to be on their guard. One of the firms that I used to supervise, what they used to do, they used to have a series of code words with their bank. So for 5 days, they would have a different code word. So if there was any communication with what purported to be the bank, they would ask for the code word. Now that has got some inherent risk in it, but how far do we go in terms of ensuring security, such as your own computer security at home, let alone, of course, when you're custodians of public money, of your client's money.
Can I just mention on that once again? We've published, for example, risk outlook documents on cybercrime and these types of issues. We also send out warning notices where we get notifications from banks. But again, we're not an expert in this, so we're not the organisation to tell you how to protect yourselves against this. What we are doing is flagging up the risk, and I think it's well known the risk, and we will, if we do, for example, pick up on a particular issue, we will send out a warning notice and let you know. But we don't have the expertise, and there's a hell of a lot of expertise out there, costing quite a lot probably, in terms of things like cybercrime. And I think a lot of them do kind of whip you up into a bit of a state and probably scaremonger a little bit in order to drive business. So I think the important point is we're not here to give you the answer here in terms of how to protect yourselves. Your businesses are your businesses. You need to think about it. The risk is there though, and we are seeing that coming through in our regulatory work. But if you all suddenly put code words in, that might not work because we're not the experts on that. Can I take, there was a question over here to the
Just,
right.
I appreciate time's running out, but just as a comment on the previous conundrum that was raised, and the rather delicate answer you gave back, from this morning's conversation, it would appear that the void to which you referred will be filled by unregulated solicitors. Moving on, why is there such a reluctance to publish on the website regular material breaches which are being reported, to give the compliance officers more guidance as to what is material and what is not material? The odd case example, 2 or 3 on the website, as I last recall, is insufficient. And one compliance officer can tell the other compliance officer that's material, and the other guy says, I don't want the SRA in, it's not material. And if you gave some positive, I've said this, I'm not sure last year or the year before here in the same conference, if you gave some positive examples of material breaches regularly being produced at the SRA, we would all have a much easier sleep at night. And I can't understand why you don't do it.
I don't know myself. Is there, Dean, is there any particular reason why we can't do more on that?
The truth answer is I don't know. That would be a policy decision. What is or is not a material breach has clearly caused some difficulty, and I think it's one that we should perhaps discuss internally.
Dean, can I get your name afterwards? I mean, to be honest with you, I don't see it as a policy issue. It's an operation. We can provide further guidance if this is an area that you're struggling with. I don't see it as an issue. So let me take your name, and on our small firm virtual group, we will talk about this issue. So if you want to join in, you need to sign up. But I think it's a good example, and if you have other examples like that, then let us know. And I'm really sorry that 2 years ago you raised it and it wasn't picked up. It was my first year at the SRA, and I probably wasn't quite sure where I was in the building. But we will pick it up today and take that forward. Can I just thank you all for coming? Can I also just thank Rachel and Dean, who did a lot of preparation for today?